Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast is here for today's Football at 4. And, Jeff, we spoke yesterday. It was a little quiet, but since you've been gone, I can breathe for the first time. I'm so moving on. No, that's somebody else sang those songs. But the Eagles have made a couple of moves, and I think they're interesting. There's some, things we can connect some dots here. Let's start with last night. A.J. Dillon, the running back. I feel like the Dillon signing, the Uche signing are very Howie Roseman signings. High upside guys who have been injured. Last year, Dillon missed the whole season. But thoughts on A.J. Dillon essentially replacing Kenny Gainwell?
Is it starting to feel like the 2023 offseason yet, Mike? Rashad Penny, Nick Morrow. Who else came in? That Terrell Edmonds. All these one-year guys, $600,000 guaranteed. In fact, Morrow, I remember when they signed him, he had zero guaranteed money. I couldn't even figure out why he was signing on the first 2 days of free agency for no guaranteed money. But, yeah, I think Rashad Penny might come to mind for certain people thinking of this A.J. Dillon signing because of the injury history and missing all of last year with nerve issues in his neck. Stingers, as they are, also bothered him in 2023. It's one of those signings where if he's healthy and he gets back to being the running back he was with the Packers, it's a good signing. And I think the Eagles were somewhat fortunate last year to give Saquon Barkley the workload that they did, and he never got hurt, which is not his history. But this is a guy, Dillon, who is a first and second down running back who can run between the tackles. The Packers, by the way, are a very big inside zone and duo team. What that means is they rely on their center and guard double teams on the defensive tackles, and then sometimes in inside zone, what happens is the center leaves his double team and goes up and covers up the middle. This is what the Eagles do. They run a ton of inside zone, ton of duo, so it's a great scheme fit. The one thing it isn't, Mike, is it's not a replacement for Kenny Gainwell because the skill sets are not similar, and the reliability on what they do for their team, what Kenny Gainwell did for the Eagles, is not similar.
Yeah, I agree with that. I talked about that earlier. I said he's got a lot different skill sets than Gainwell, but I think he's a guy who that if Barkley got hurt for whatever reason for a week or two, he could be a 20 carry a game kind of guy and be more of a replacement for Barkley than maybe Gainwell could have been.
Or how about this? Let's say the tush push gets banned, 3rd and 1. Let's just come out with our 5-man offensive line, a tight end, a big blocking tight end, 6, quarterback 7, Ben Van Sumeren at fullback, and then A.J. Dillon and Saquon Barkley in the backfield in a pony package. You're talking about A.J. Dillon is 245 pounds, I think.
Yeah, big
Saquon
dude.
Barkley's 235. Ben Van Sumeren's 230, 235. You got a big offensive line. You get a tight end there in a block. Okay, take the tush push away. We'll just hit you with about as many 250 to 350-pound guys as we can.
Do we dare to say that A.J. Dillon could be a vulture, one of these goal line backs that steals some of these things? By the way, so A.J. Dillon's here. He missed all of last season. He had a neck injury based from a stinger that he had, but he's a guy who's reached the end zone a lot. Let's go to Harrison Bryant, the tight end, who has also carried the ball a lot. He has carried the ball for a lot of first downs as a tight end for the Browns. But we know the tight end signing is an interesting one. He has caught the ball. He can block, so he's not a one-trick pony. But obviously that raises up some red flags to what could be the reason they brought a tight end here.
Well, they needed a tight end, Mike. They need tight end depth. Regardless of whether or not they keep Dallas Goedert gets hurt. And when Dallas Goedert gets hurt and then they have to go forward, they basically, again, sort of being fortunate but also deep. I mean, Grant Calcaterra did a nice job catching passes when called upon. He's not a blocker. Everybody knows that. You can watch how much their run game struggles when he has to be the lead tight end blocker. That's why they had guys like C.J. Uzomah in there. They had Jack Stoll for a couple of weeks until, they released him and the Dolphins claimed him. They have E.J. Jenkins, a 250-pound guy that they're trying to groom. You need blocking, and it's hard to find blocking in tight ends unless you're really going that veteran scrap heap route like Uzama. So Harrison Bryant is a younger guy who can block. He's not going to give you tremendous amount in the passing game, but he can block. So if they do move on from Dallas Goedert, it doesn't mean Harris Bryant becomes your number one tight end just because he can block, but he becomes someone who can help you while you're grooming your next true dual tight end, whoever that may be. And the Eagles are pretty good. I mean, they went from Brent Selleck to Zach Ertz to Dallas Goedert without skipping a beat there.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Harrison Bryant is probably a step up from Calcaterra and Stoll, that little conglomerate that kind of were the backups whenever Goddard would go out. Now, you mentioned we don't know if Goddard's going to be here or not, but they seemingly had to get somebody better than Calcaterra in the event that Goddard is not back. And I don't know if that means that Harrison Bryant is elevated to your number one guy, but you had to have something better. As you said, you had to have another tight end here.
Right. I mean, like I said, last year it was a mixture of Stoll and Uzama, and neither of those guys are back, so you needed it. And like the Eagles tend to do, they're looking for someone a little bit younger, right? You're still trying to get bargain shopping, but you're at least trying to go with someone younger and more durable, and so they're able to get a guy like Harrison Bryant.
Yeah, this is a guy who was a fourth-round pick a couple of years ago. I think he won the Mackey Award when he was at Florida Atlantic, and is a guy who got drafted by the Cleveland Browns. Had some good seasons with the Browns, by the way. He ended up going to Vegas with the Raiders, who were just loaded with tight ends there. So hard to see what kind of receiver you are on that team with Brock Bowers and Mayer there. But the Eagles signed a tight end today, Harrison Bryant. Another one-year deal. This is what the Eagles do. They'll give you the one-year deal. You're not getting 2 years if you're not the starting guy on the team. And then the other guy, this one's kind of interesting. This is a very Eagle deal, right? This is a very Howie Roseman deal. Josh Uche, who was a second-round pick, had 11.5 sacks in 2022, comes out of Michigan, and then he hasn't done anything. I mean, has done nothing since. In fact, he got himself traded from the Patriots to the Chiefs, and neither team decided to bring him back. He goes to Philly on a one-year deal. This is your reclamation, second-year guy with all the tools.
Yes, and I believe it's pronounced Uche, by the way, Josh Uche. But so Greg Cosell, I would like everybody to listen to our first edition this year of The Intel with Greg Cosell. It's out on our YouTube and podcast platforms today. He likes Uche because this is a guy who was, like you said, a second-round pick out of Michigan, has great traits, really nice traits, and those traits 1 year manifested into him having 11.5 sacks and playing really well for the Patriots. I believe it was his second or third year. But every other year he's been in the league, he's really not been a factor. And like you mentioned, the Chiefs trade for him, and they're hoping to just get a little bit of juice. And not only did they not get that, he was inactive for the last 5 games. The only game he wasn't inactive for was the meaningless season finale that Carson Wentz started for, and that they lost to the Broncos and didn't care about. And then came the postseason, and he was inactive. So hard to get really excited about this. Could he come here and he'll compete for a job, and maybe he'll rediscover whatever it was that 2 or 3 years ago made him a better pass rusher? But you can't. I would encourage fans, people, who are interested, not to put all their eggs in the basket, as this is your replacement for Josh Sweat. He is a bargain shop, 1 year deal, prove it deal, as we like to call it, guy who's going to come in here, compete. You hope that he makes the team and plays better and takes the pressure off Jalix Hunt, who's just not ready to be, playing 75, 80% of the snaps. You want a good rotation anyway. You still need bodies because Brandon Graham's probably going to retire, and you really only have Jalix Hunt and Nolan Smith, and Smith is coming off his own surgery. So it's the type of shopping that Howie Roseman's going to do. There's the draft, there's trade still. This will not be their last move at that position.
That's what I was going to say. That's not because you just mentioned, whether or not he's not going to replace Josh Sweat, Jalix Hunt, or be in that rotation. I mean, he is a small guy. I mean, 6'1", 240. I mean, he's definitely smaller than a guy like Josh Sweat. He's more in like the Nolan Smith kind of mold, and he has been a situational pass rusher, and that is it. I mean, he is not going to help you against the run.
Exactly. Designated pass rusher, DPR they call them, kind of like what Bryce Huff was for the Jets before the Eagles tried to make him into but more productive, of course, than than Uche was. I mean, Bryce Huff was an emerging player, and they thought he would be able to handle it. So far, he hasn't. But, yeah, you cannot look at Uche. I just caution people, because sometimes we do this, whether it's a first round. Whenever the Eagles trade for a guy who's like a first or a second round pick, people get really excited and think that guy is going to be what he was supposed to be. You know, we talk about Jahan Dotson, but this is like Greedy Williams a couple of years ago from the Browns, the cornerback who was a second round pick and had all those traits and didn't even make the team. And Rashad Penny, we mentioned. There have been a lot of guys, from all the way back to Ernie Sims, who the Eagles have traded for, who have been either first round picks or top 50 picks. And the temptation is to think that because they come DGB, remember him? The
Dorial Green Beckham for the listeners out there.
Right. The temptation is to think these guys are going to come be Eagles and just they're going to turn it around. That more often than not doesn't happen. Chance Warmack, another one.
Yeah, and they do have a mold of guys that they like to try to get. You know, a guy that had talent, produced at one point. That's the one thing Uche has produced at one point. He did have 11.5 sacks one year. That's a lot of getting to the quarterback, much like Bryce Huff. He had a one breakout year where you're like, whoa. I wouldn't have given Uche $55 million after his 11.5 sack season, but I digress. Roseman does make some bad decisions, but he has that 1 year where you're like, okay, can we be the team that gets that back out of him?
And that's what they're going to, they're going to bank on some coaching here. Just like with Stoutland and Kenyon Green, you're hoping that the coaching and the development means something there.
And by the way, Kenyon Green said something today that if you're an Eagles fan, you should be excited about. They asked him what he needs to work on, and he said, I think my technique needs work. Like that's an area where you want to hear him acknowledge that if somebody works with my technique, I think I might be better. Agreed.
And I would agree with that assessment. And so would Greg Cosell, who broke down Kenyon Green really well in our show that's available out right now, the Intel with Greg Cosell.
Right. So those are the type of players. You mentioned Green, A.J. Dillon, a second-round pick who's been productive in this league. And Dillon's interesting, too, because he is a 27-year-old running back. So he's not like a 30-year-old guy who's at the end of the road. He still has some, you would think, a little bit of – look, they brought Barkley in here when he was 27 years old.
Right. And he's not a reclamation project either. He's played to a level of a second-round pick, when he's been on the field. I mean, he had
pretty good.
1,000-yard. Yeah, he's pretty good. He had a 1,000-yard year in year two, 800 and 300 receiving, which, by the way, for a guy who is, and Greg talked about this, for a guy who is 245 pounds, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's Austin Eckler, but he's pretty decent at catching the ball and being able to pick up some yards. He's a little more fleet of foot than your average 245-pound running back.
Well, I mean, are we at the point, though, where the Eagles are just not going to throw the ball to the back, so it doesn't really matter that he can catch the ball or not? Can you protect?
Again, if Saquon is missing 2 or 3 games and he's got to be your first and second round, you're not going to run on first and second down every single time. And every once in a while, you might need to check it down. So Obviously the Packers didn't want to feature him as a receiver, but he still had 34 catches for 313. And then year 3, it was 28 for 206. So he can give you that ability a little bit.
Yeah. So there's the 3 moves they have made in the last 24 hours. A.J. Dillon last night. Josh Uche today, the edge rusher, and then the tight end, Harrison Bryant. So obviously a pattern with guys who are all very talented, 1-year deals. And you wonder, is this just going to be it until draft day when they have all these picks? You've heard, they got 20 picks in the next 2 years, 11 in the first 5 rounds over the next 2 drafts. And you almost feel like you're going to have to move some of those picks, and that might be your night when you see them really add an impactful type of guy.
Yeah, I think the lesson to be learned here is, and I'm sure Howie would probably explain to you this, is that you're signing these guys to hopefully give you some depth where you need it. If they have to step in and start, you hope you have enough talent around them to be able to compensate. But you're not signing these guys with the expectation that they are filling voids of players you lost. Those voids are being filled by the guys you've drafted the last 2 years, the guys you're going to draft this year, and then maybe some other trades or free agent signings that they might make between now and the start of the season. 2 years ago, the mistake they made was trying to fill those voids with one-year free agents who are asked to be starters, and they didn't have enough talent around them. I'm talking about Terrell Edmonds having to play safety, not very good. They had to wind up starting Just Evans, not very good, got hurt. Nick Morrow and Zach Cunningham having to play linebacker, right? Those were Greedy Williams at corner. Those hurt them. But this time, they have more talent and young talent, both on offense and defense, so that they shouldn't need these guys to be heroes for them, just depth pieces.
And I think we should stress again, you also have to take into account, which a lot of people don't like to do. It's like when you lose guys and then the next guy has to step in. Well, he's not going to be as good as Milton Williams. Maybe not, but Jalen Carter should be better this year than he was last year. Quinyon Mitchell should be better this year than he was last year. Cooper DeJean should be better this year than he was last year. Nolan Smith, you're hoping – I think it's amazing that Nolan Smith – was essentially a rookie last year. I mean, he barely played any snaps on defense, right? You know, Zach Bond was essentially a middle linebacker, rookie, never played that spot. I think we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but Mitchell, DeJean, those guys had never played. And the communication factor that they had together, that's going to be hard to replicate, right? When you bring in now a new safety, a new corner, whether it's an outside corner or you move Cooper to the outside, and then a new slot. I know Vic doesn't like to call him a slot corner. He's just a nickel, right?
He's a nickel. That's right. Because you're not on the corner if you're a nickel. You're inside, right? You're the fifth guy, like a nickel is five. So, yes, that's
just
you're a
nickel. So that's going to be an element that they're going to have to now bring two new players into the defense, and that's something to keep in mind.
It is something to keep in mind. It's going to be hard, you're right, to be as good as you were last year. But some of being as great as they were last year is because they got excellent production from guys that they couldn't have known that they were going to get. Zach Bond, especially, and those two rookies, we all expected to be good, but not as – I don't think anybody thought that DeJean and Mitchell were going to be this good this soon. So that doesn't happen every year.
You're right.
But I would still say this. For those who are very concerned, and I do see a lot of them, like, we're not going to be as good as last year. Okay, how many teams are? How many teams are as good as the Eagles were, right? And then the next year they come back the same or better. But compare the Eagles' top 10 players right now. Maybe you could do this as in your next segment, to any other NFL's team's top 10 players, and you tell me if there's another team that can match the top 10 for top 10. It's going to be tough.
and you know what's funny? I one night I'm driving home after they win the Super Bowl, and the realization sets in, like, wow, they won the Super Bowl. It's pretty unbelievable. Like, you know, it's pretty cool. And then it's like, so then the next year, are you supposed to just say, well, we won last year, so I can't assume that we're going to win it again? And then if you win back to back, it's like, all right, like, you really can't do it three times. Like, That is the odd part about being a fan, is you want to win the Super Bowl and then or a championship, and then when you do, the realization of, like, when can we actually do this again? There's only a handful of franchises that get these multiple pockets of them, 3 and 4 years, 5 and you know what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, they're going to take a step back. They put a lot of eggs into win. But the thing is, did they put the eggs in the basket to win the Super Bowl last year, or did they exceed the timeline?
I mean, I know a lot of people went into 2024 thinking the Eagles would be pretty good. I did not see a lot of people predicting them to win the Super Bowl.
Right. So they do win that Super Bowl, and now it's like, you know, this whole thing of, well, can we win it again because we arrived a little early last year? And that's where Roseman is trying to almost serve two masters here. He's trying to, like, hey, we have I've said this. I think they have this window with the offensive team, the offensive players, of 3 seasons. We're taking our best shot for 3 years with the guys we have on offense. And whether their defense was so good last year was probably one of the main reasons why they won. But I think inside that building, they view themselves, we're an offensive team first.
That's interesting. I mean, that's where the money certainly is, and where the star power.
That if we're going to win, the offense has to carry us because that's where we've invested our money.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Even with putting $17.5 million into Zach Bond, which is not something the Eagles have done in the past, and the Eagles will put a lot of money into Jalen Carter when it's time to put money into Carter, and same thing with DeJean and Mitchell.
But, again, they scored 40-plus points in the Super Bowl. So it's like, even if our defense was just average, we probably would have won that game, even though the defense dominated.
Yes. Yeah, scored 33 actually, Mike.
Interception return for a touchdown. All right, football at 4.
Honestly, the ball one was so deep in territory, like yeah. But no, they definitely moved the ball really well. But to your point, how many teams in the salary cap era have won back-to-back championships? The Chiefs, obviously, and the Patriots. That's it, right? I think the Cowboys, when the Cowboys won back-to-back, was that
92, 93?
So wasn't the salary cap put? When I say salary cap, what I mean is free agency era. When did Reggie leave the Eagles? My mind is suddenly jogging me. That was the start of the free agency era. That was the first year, right? Yeah, right. So really, it's just been the Chiefs and the Patriots, and it's because you have Hall of Fame coach and Hall of Fame quarterback, right?
Geoff Mosher pinch hitting today for Andrew DeCecco, and Mosher, of course, always a great job. Good to see you, man, and I'll see you again on Monday.
All right, take care.
All right, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, you get that every day right here on the Sports Bash. We get Football at 4 all season long, all off-season, Monday through Friday, 4 o'clock. You know you're getting football right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN